FBI agents swarmed the entrance of Kellerman's Hardware, a store that's been a Main Street fixture for 40 years. Shoppers freeze mid-step, car doors slam, radios crackle with urgent commands. And there, in handcuffs, stands Robert Bob Kellerman, 71 years old, silver hair, kind eyes that have greeted customers every morning since 1969. The man who sponsored the Little League team, who donated tools to the high school shop class, who never missed a church potluck. Neighbors spill onto the sidewalk, hands covering their mouths in disbelief. Parents who trusted him with their kids, friends who'd known him for decades, all watching as federal agents read him his rights. The charge? First-degree murder. The victim? 22-year-old Aria Harris, missing since November 14, 1970. How could the man who coached their children, who handed out candy at Halloween, be responsible for a murder that haunted this town for 39 years? Before we uncover the truth, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe where this story goes. And drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, you need to know who Aria Harris was. In 1970, Aria was 22 years old, a young woman with her whole life stretching out before her, like the endless blue waters of Lake Michigan she'd grown up beside. She had dark auburn hair that caught the light just right, a smile that could disarm the grumpiest diner customer, and a laugh her younger sister described as contagious. Aria wasn't just passing time in Manistique. She had plans, big ones. She'd been working double shifts at the Harbor Inn restaurant on Lakeshore Drive, saving every tip, every extra dollar, for nursing school. She'd already been accepted to a program downstate in Grand Rapids, set to start the following fall. Her mother kept the acceptance letter pinned to the refrigerator, a daily reminder that her daughter was going places. But Aria wasn't in a rush to leave her hometown behind. She loved Manistique, loved the way the fog rolled in off the lake on autumn mornings, loved the smell of fresh walleye frying at the Harbor Inn, loved knowing everyone's name at the post office, the bakery, the Five and Dime. She lived with her parents and younger sister in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from the Lake Michigan shoreline. Her father worked at the paper mill. Her mother volunteered at the library. They were the kind of family that ate dinner together every night, said Grace, and never locked their doors. That was Manistique in 1970, a town of about 3,500 people tucked into Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where the Manistique River meets Lake Michigan. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, where neighbors borrowed sugar and returned it with homemade cookies, where everyone knew everyone, and that felt like safety. Aria was woven into the fabric of that community. She babysat for families on her street, sang in the church choir, helped her father rake leaves every October. On her days off, she'd walk down to the boardwalk and watch the fishing boats come in, dreaming about the life she'd build after nursing school. Maybe she'd come back to Manistique, open a clinic, take care of the people who'd raised her. She was dependable, responsible, the kind of daughter parents pointed to as an example. And on November 14th, 1970, she clocked out of her evening shift at the Harbor Inn, waved goodbye to the cook, pulled her coat tight against the cold, and started the 15-minute walk home. She never made it. And for 39 years, her family would be left with nothing but questions, grief, and a haunting absence that no amount of time could fill. But Aria's story didn't end that night. It was only beginning. November 14th, 1970, Saturday night. The Harbor Inn was busy that evening. Weekend crowd, families celebrating birthdays, couples on date night, fishermen warming up with coffee after a long day on the water. Aria worked the floor with her usual energy, balancing plates, refilling drinks, making small talk with regulars who'd known her since she was a kid. Her shift ended at 11:30 p.m. She counted her tips in the back, $23, a good night, and tucked the bills into her purse. She said goodnight to Eddie, the night cook, who was scrubbing down the grill. He'd later tell police she seemed happy, normal, maybe a little tired, but nothing unusual. She stepped out into the cold. November in Michigan's Upper Peninsula doesn't mess around. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. A light snow had started to fall, dusting the sidewalks along Lakeshore Drive. Aria pulled her navy blue peacoat tighter, adjusted the strap of her purse over her shoulder, and started walking. Her route home was simple, familiar. She'd walked it hundreds of times. East on Lakeshore Drive, then a right onto Deer Street, past the old railroad depot, past Street Francis Church, then left onto Maple Street. 15 minutes, tops. She'd be home by midnight, maybe catch the tail end of Johnny Carson with her dad before heading to bed. Her mother, Aria Harris, was waiting up. She always did when Aria worked the late shift. She sat in the living room with a book, glancing at the clock on the mantel every few minutes. 11:50 p.m. Aria should be halfway home by now. Midnight. She should be walking up the front steps. 12:10 a.m. Patricia stood and looked out the window. The street was empty, snow falling softly under the streetlights. 12:20 a.m. She woke her husband, Donald. "Something's wrong," she said. "Aria should have been home by now." Donald tried to calm her. Maybe Aria stopped to talk to a friend. Maybe she went to someone's house. But even as he said it, he knew it didn't make sense. Aria always called, if her plans changed. Always. By 12:45 a.m., Donald was in his truck, driving Aria's route in reverse, headlights cutting through the snow. He drove slowly, scanning the sidewalks, the alleys, the dark spaces between buildings. Nothing. He pulled into the Harbor Inn parking lot. Eddie was locking up. "She left over an hour ago," he said, concern creeping into his voice. "Headed home, like always." Donald's stomach dropped. He drove to the police station, filed a missing person report. Officer Jim Dalton took down the details, radioed patrol units, promised they'd start searching immediately. By 2 a.m., half the neighborhood was awake, flashlights bobbing through backyards, voices calling Aria's name into the darkness, friends, neighbors, strangers all searching. And then, just after dawn on Sunday morning, a jogger found it. Aria's purse. Lying in the dirt near the old railroad tracks, about 6 blocks from the Harbor Inn. The contents were scattered lipstick, a compact mirror, loose change glinting in the early light. Her wallet was still inside, cash untouched. Her keys were there too. But Aria was gone. No signs of a struggle, no footprints in the snow that had melted overnight, no witnesses, no screams heard, no blood. Just a purse, abandoned, in the cold. And a family's worst nightmare beginning to take shape. By Sunday afternoon, Manistique was a town transformed by fear. The Manistique Police Department, a small force of 8 officers, had never handled anything like this. Missing persons cases in the Upper Peninsula usually ended one of 2 ways. Someone wandered off into the woods and got lost, or a teenager ran away and turned up a few days later. But this, a responsible young woman vanishing mid-walk on a Saturday night? This was different. Chief Harold Brennan called in reinforcements. By Monday morning, Michigan State Police had set up a command center in the high school gymnasium. Detectives from Marquette and Escanaba arrived with boxes of files, maps, and interview forms. The FBI field office in Detroit was notified, though, without evidence of kidnapping across state lines, their involvement would be limited. The investigation moved fast in those first 72 hours. Detectives interviewed everyone who'd seen Aria that night. Eddie, the cook, repeated his story. She left around 11:40 p.m., seemed fine, walked east toward home. A couple leaving the Harbor Inn remembered seeing her on the sidewalk, coat pulled tight, head down against the cold. A truck driver passing through town thought he saw a young woman matching her description near Deer Street, but he couldn't be sure. They interviewed her family, her friends, her co-workers, ex-boyfriends, though Aria hadn't dated anyone seriously in over a year, teachers from her high school, the mailman, the pharmacist, anyone who might know something, anything. They came up empty. Detectives canvassed every business along her route home, the hardware store, the barber shop, the insurance office, all closed by the time Aria walked past. No one saw anything, no one heard anything. Search parties combed the woods surrounding Manistique. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through dense pine forests, checking abandoned hunting cabins, old wells, ravines. Divers searched the Manistique River and the shoreline of Lake Michigan, dragging the frigid water for any sign of a body. Nothing. The problem was evidence, or the lack of it. In 1970, Forensic science was still in its infancy. DNA profiling didn't exist. Fingerprint analysis was limited. There were no security cameras, no cell phone records, no digital footprints to follow. All they had was a purse. Crime scene technicians processed it carefully. They dusted for fingerprints found only Aria's. They examined the strap, the lining, the contents. And there, on the leather strap, they found something. A small, dark stain. It could be blood. It could be dirt. They couldn't tell with the technology available. They bagged it, catalogued it, stored it in the evidence room. Theories began to circulate. Maybe Aria had been picked up by someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to accept a ride from. Maybe she'd been grabbed off the street by a stranger passing through town. Maybe she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have and was silenced. Detectives looked at drifters, transients, anyone with a criminal record within a 100-mile radius. They questioned truck drivers who'd passed through Manistique that weekend. They investigated a rumor about a suspicious car seen near the railroad tracks. Every lead went nowhere. Weeks turned into months. The command center at the high school was dismantled. State police detectives returned to their regular assignments. The search parties stopped. The newspaper stories became less frequent. And Aria's case file, thick with interviews, maps, and dead-end leads, was placed in a cardboard box and moved to a storage room in the basement of the Manistique Police Department. The case went cold. But Aria's family refused to let her be forgotten. The first year was the hardest. Aria Harris kept Aria's bedroom exactly as she'd left it. The nursing school acceptance letter still pinned to the refrigerator, the waitress uniform still hanging in the closet. Every morning, Patricia set 4 plates at the breakfast table out of habit, then quietly put one back in the cupboard. Donald stopped sleeping through the night. He'd wake at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., replaying that drive home in his mind, wondering if he'd missed something, some clue in the darkness that could have brought his daughter home. Aria's younger sister, Julie, withdrew, stopped singing in the choir, stopped going to football games. How could life just continue when Aria was gone? But life did continue. That's what haunted them most. Every November 14th, the family held a vigil at St. Francis Church, candles flickering in the cold, prayers whispered into the wind. The first year, over 200 people showed up. By the 5th year, it was 50. By the 10th, maybe 20. The local newspaper, the Manistique Pioneer Tribune, ran anniversary stories. 10 years later, what happened to Aria Harris? 15 years since Aria vanished, family still seeks answers. Each article shorter than the last, each buried deeper in the back pages. New detectives inherited the case as older ones retired. They'd open the box, read through the files, shake their heads at the lack of evidence, and eventually move on to cases they could actually solve. The trail was too cold, the witnesses' memories too faded, the technology too limited. Aria became a ghost story, a cautionary tale parents told their teenagers. Be careful walking alone at night. Remember what happened to Aria Harris. But to her family, she was never a story. She was a daughter, a sister, a woman whose life had been stolen, whose dreams had been buried in silence. Aria Harris wrote letters, dozens of them, to the Michigan State Police, to the FBI, to television shows that featured unsolved cases. Please don't forget my daughter. Please keep looking. Most went unanswered. A few generated polite responses promising the case remained open, though no active investigation was underway. The psychological toll spread beyond the Harris family. Manistique changed. Doors that had never been locked suddenly had deadbolts. Parents who'd let their kids roam free now demanded they check in every hour. Trust, the invisible thread that held small towns together, had been severed. And somewhere in that town, someone knew what happened. Someone had seen something, done something, hidden something. For 20 years, then 30, then 35, that person walked the streets of Manistique, shopped at the grocery store, attended church, lived a normal life, while Aria's family lived in agony. But in 2008, something changed. Science caught up, and the clock started ticking on a killer who thought he'd gotten away with murder. Robert Bob Kellerman was 32 years old in November 1970. He'd opened Kellerman's Hardware on Cedar Street in 1969, right in the heart of downtown Manistique. It was a dream come true, his own business, His name on the sign, a chance to build something lasting in the town where he'd grown up. The store became an institution almost overnight. Need a wrench? Bob had it. Looking for the right paint color? Bob would mix it himself. Broken lawnmower? Bob would order the part and show you how to install it. He knew his inventory like the back of his hand, remembered every customer's name, and always had a joke ready at the register. "Morning, Bob," became the soundtrack of Cedar Street. He was more than a business owner. He was a pillar of the community. In 1972, he sponsored the Manistique Little League team, the Kellerman's Hardware Hawks, bought the uniforms himself, showed up to every game with a cooler full of sodas. Kids loved him. Parents trusted him. Coaches respected him. He volunteered at St. Francis Church, the same church where Aria's family held their annual vigils. He'd help set up folding chairs for events, fix the leaky faucet in the parish hall, donate supplies for the youth group's service projects. He joined the Rotary Club in 1975, attended every pancake breakfast fundraiser, contributed to scholarship funds, shook hands with the mayor at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Bob Kellerman was everywhere, and everyone liked him. He married in 1973 a quiet woman named Margaret, who worked as a secretary at the paper mill. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, who grew up helping out at the hardware store on weekends. The family lived in a tidy ranch house on Oak Street, 3 blocks from the store. They had a dog, a vegetable garden, a boat they'd take out on the lake in summer. From the outside, Bob Kellerman's life looked perfect, normal, unremarkable in the best possible way. But beneath that friendly smile, behind those helpful hands, lived a monster. And the cruelest part, he'd interacted with Aria's family for decades. Donald Harris bought supplies from Kellerman's Hardware when he built a new deck in 1978. Bob rang him up at the register, made small talk about the weather, wished him a good day. Patricia Harris saw Bob at church every Sunday. They'd nod politely in the parking lot, exchange pleasantries about the sermon. Julie, Aria's younger sister, bought her first toolbox from Kellerman's Hardware when she moved into her own apartment in 1982. Bob helped her pick out a hammer, a screwdriver set, picture-hanging nails, told her to come back if she needed anything else. He looked them in the eye, shook their hands, smiled, all while knowing exactly what he'd done to their daughter, their sister. How does someone do that? How does a man carry that kind of secret for 39 years without cracking? Psychologists call it compartmentalization, the ability to separate different parts of your life into sealed boxes that never touch. Bob Kellerman was a master at it. At work, he was the helpful hardware guy. At home, he was the devoted husband and father. At church, he was the faithful volunteer. And in the darkest corner of his mind, locked away where no one could see, he was a killer. He never slipped, never confessed to a friend after too many beers, never left a diary, never revisited the crime scene. He buried it so deep that even the people closest to him, his wife, his kids, his best friends, never suspected a thing. But here's what Bob Kellerman didn't know in 1970, as he hid his crime and built his perfect life. Evidence doesn't forget, and science doesn't stop evolving. That small stain on Aria's purse strap, the one detectives bagged and stored in 1970, was waiting for technology to catch up, waiting for someone to care enough to look again, waiting for justice. What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. Detective Sarah Vance didn't grow up in Manistique. She transferred to the Michigan State Police Post in 2007, a 34-year-old investigator with fresh eyes and a stubborn streak. Her colleagues both admired and found exhausting. She'd grown up watching cold case shows on television, unsolved mysteries, cold case files, stories about detectives who refused to give up, who used new technology to solve murders that had gone cold decades earlier. Those shows planted a seed. Old cases weren't hopeless. They were just waiting for the right person to care. In early 2008, during a slow week, Sarah asked her supervisor if she could review unsolved cases from the 1,970 seconds. He shrugged. Knock yourself out. Most of that stuff's in storage. She spent 3 days in the basement of the Manistique Police Department, pulling boxes off metal shelves, blowing dust off file folders, reading reports typed on manual typewriters. And then she found Aria Harris. The case file was thick, hundreds of pages of interviews, search reports, dead-end leads. But what caught Sarah's attention was the evidence log. Specifically, item #7, victim's purse, brown leather, with suspected biological material on shoulder strap. Biological material. In 1970, that meant almost nothing. They could test for blood type at best, and even that was unreliable. But in 2008, DNA profiling had revolutionized forensic science. Labs could extract genetic profiles from samples decades old, from a single hair, a drop of saliva, a microscopic trace of skin cells. Sarah made a call to the evidence room. "Do you still have item #7 from case file 70 to 1847? The evidence clerk checked the logs. "Yeah, it's here. Been in storage since 1970. You want it pulled?" "Absolutely." 2 weeks later, Aria's purse sat on a stainless steel table at the Michigan State Police Forensic Lab in Marquette. A forensic scientist named Dr. Linda Chen carefully examined the leather strap under high-powered magnification. The stain was still there, faint, brownish, barely visible to the naked eye. She swabbed it, prepared the sample, ran the extraction protocol, and got a hit. DNA, male, not Aria's. It wasn't much degraded after nearly 4 decades, but it was enough to generate a partial profile. 13 genetic markers, not a complete picture, but enough to run through databases. Sarah submitted the profile to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database containing millions of DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and unsolved crime scenes. She didn't expect a match. Most cold cases didn't get that lucky. But 3 weeks later, her phone rang. "Detective Vance, we got a hit. Familial match." Sarah's heart jumped. A familial match meant the DNA didn't belong to someone in the database, but it belonged to a close relative of someone in the database. A parent, a sibling, a child. The match pointed to a man named David Kellerman, arrested in 2003 for drunk driving in Lansing. His DNA had been entered into the system as part of Michigan's expanded database laws. Sarah pulled David Kellerman's file. Born 1975. Grew up in Manistique. Son of Robert and Margaret Kellerman. Robert Kellerman. The name meant nothing to Sarah. She was new to town. But when she ran a background check, the details emerged. Hardware store owner, lifelong Manistique resident, age 71. No criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. She pulled property records, employment history, and old newspaper archives. And there it was, in a 1972 edition of the Manistique Pioneer Tribune, a photo of Bob Kellerman presenting new uniforms to the Little League team he sponsored. The beloved hardware store owner, the community volunteer, the man everyone trusted. Sarah cross-referenced his timeline with Aria's case. In November 1970, Bob Kellerman was 32 years old, living in Manistique, running his hardware store on Cedar Street, just 4 blocks from the Harbor Inn where Aria worked. She pulled surveillance records, interviewed people who knew him, built a timeline of his movements. And then she did something crucial. She obtained a discarded coffee cup from Kellerman's hardware, sent it to the lab for DNA analysis. The results came back in April 2009. Perfect match. The DNA on Aria's purse strap belonged to Robert Kellerman. Sarah sat in her office, staring at the report, her hands shaking. After 39 years, she had him. She picked up the phone and called the FBI. "We need to move fast," she said. "Before he runs. Don't go anywhere. The next part will blow your mind. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss a story like this." May 12th, 2009, 9:30 a.m. Bob Kellerman unlocked the front door of his hardware store, just like he had every weekday morning for 40 years. He flipped the sign from closed to open, turned on the lights, and started brewing coffee in the back office. It was Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually slow. He'd probably spend the morning restocking shelves, helping a few contractors pick up supplies, maybe chatting with old-timers who stopped by just to pass the time. He had no idea that 8 FBI agents and 4 Michigan State Police detectives were parked 3 blocks away, waiting for the signal. Detective Sarah Vance sat in an unmarked sedan, watching the hardware store through binoculars, her heart hammered in her chest. They'd spent weeks planning this moment, coordinating with federal prosecutors, securing the arrest warrant, briefing the tactical team. They couldn't afford mistakes, not after 39 years. At 9:47 a.m., she gave the order. Move in. 3 black SUVs pulled onto Cedar Street. Agents in tactical vests stepped out, hands on their weapons. Shoppers on the sidewalk stopped mid-stride, confused. A woman loading groceries into her car froze, watching. The lead agent pushed open the door to Kellerman's Hardware. The bell above the door chimed the same cheerful sound that had greeted customers for decades. Bob Kellerman looked up from behind the counter, a smile already forming on his face. "Morning. What can I help you?" The words died in his throat. "Robert Kellerman?" the agent said, badge held high. Bob's face went pale. "Yes?" "FBI. You're under arrest for the murder of Aria Harris." The room seemed to tilt. Bob's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands gripped the edge of the counter. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "There's been a mistake," Bob stammered, his voice shaking. I didn't. "Turn around, now." The handcuffs clicked into place, cold metal against his wrists. The agent read him his rights, each word echoing through the silent store. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors, customers, people who'd known Bob Kellerman their entire lives. "What's going on?" someone shouted. "Is Bob okay? What did he do?" As agents led Bob out of the store, the whispers started, then gasps, then stunned silence. Margaret Kellerman, Bob's wife, was at the grocery store when her phone rang. A friend, breathless and panicked. "Turn on the news. It's about Bob." She abandoned her cart and drove home, hands shaking on the steering wheel. By the time she pulled into her driveway, news vans were already parked on her street. At the Manistique Police Department, Detective Vance called Patricia Harris. "Mrs. Harris, this is Detective Sarah Vance with the Michigan State Police. I need you to sit down." Patricia's voice trembled. "Did you find her? Did you find Aria?" "We made an arrest this morning. We have the man who killed your daughter." Silence. Then a sound half sob, half gasp that Sarah would never forget. "Who?" Patricia whispered. "Robert Kellerman, the hardware store owner." The phone clattered to the floor. Within an hour, the news spread through Manistique like wildfire. Bob Kellerman arrested for murder. Bob Kellerman, the Little League sponsor. Bob Kellerman, who'd lived among them for 71 years. People couldn't process it, refused to believe it. "There's no way," said a man who'd bought tools from Bob for 30 years. "He's the nicest guy in town." "He coached my son's baseball team," said another, voice breaking. "My son loved him." But others remembered Aria Harris, remembered the vigils, remembered a family that had suffered for nearly 4 decades, while Bob Kellerman smiled and sold hammers and pretended to be a good man. At the county jail, Bob sat in an interrogation room, head in his hands. The mask he'd worn for 39 years was finally cracking. And Detective Sarah Vance sat across from him, a folder of evidence on the table between them, ready to hear the truth. Bob Kellerman sat in the interrogation room for 3 hours before he said a word. Detective Sarah Vance didn't rush him. She laid out the evidence methodically, piece by piece. The DNA from Aria's purse strap, the familial match through his son, the direct match from his discarded coffee cup, the timeline placing him in Manistique the night Aria disappeared. "The science doesn't lie, Bob," Sarah said quietly. "We know it was you." Bob stared at the table. His hands trembled. The friendly hardware store owner, the man who'd spent decades hiding behind a smile, was gone. What remained was a 71-year-old man facing the weight of a secret he'd carried for 39 years. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Sarah leaned forward. "Tell me what happened, Bob." And he did. November 14th, 1970. Bob had been driving home from a friend's house around midnight when he saw Aria walking alone on Deer Street. He knew her. Everyone in Manistique knew everyone. He'd seen her at the diner, around town, at church. He pulled over, rolled down the window, offered her a ride. "It's cold," he'd said. "Hop in. I'll get you home." Aria hesitated, but she knew Bob Kellerman. He seemed safe, trustworthy, so she got in. But Bob didn't drive toward Maple Street. He turned onto a side road leading toward the woods outside town. Aria asked where they were going. He didn't answer. She tried to get out. He grabbed her. She fought back. He hit her, and then his voice broke as he said it. He strangled her. "I panicked," Bob said, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't know what to do." He drove her body deep into the woods, to a remote area near an old logging road. He buried her in a shallow grave, covered it with branches and leaves. Then he drove back to town, threw her purse near the railroad tracks to make it look like she'd been attacked there, and went home. He washed his truck, burned his clothes, and the next morning he opened his hardware store like nothing had happened. "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why did you do it?" Bob shook his head. "I don't know. I've asked myself that every day for 39 years. The confession was recorded, transcribed, signed. In October 2009, Robert Kellerman stood trial in Schoolcraft County Circuit Court. The courtroom was packed. Aria's family sat in the front row. Patricia, now 79 years old, clutching a photo of her daughter. Julie, Aria's sister, held her mother's hand. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, the confession, testimony from forensic experts. The case was airtight. Bob's defense attorney argued diminished capacity, claimed his client had lived with guilt and remorse for decades, but the jury wasn't swayed. After 3 days of testimony and 2 hours of deliberation, the verdict came back. Guilty. First-degree murder. At sentencing, Patricia Harris stood to give a victim impact statement. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she held the microphone. "You stole my daughter's life," she said, looking directly at Bob. "You stole 39 years from our family. You looked us in the eye for decades, knowing what you'd done. I hope you spend every day of the rest of your life thinking about Aria." The judge sentenced Robert Kellerman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, head down, while Aria's family wept, not just from grief, but from relief. Finally, after 39 years, justice had been served. The day after the sentencing, Patricia Harris returned to Street Francis Church. She stood in the same spot where she'd held vigils for 39 years, candles in the cold, prayers whispered into the wind, hope fading a little more each November. But this time was different. This time, she could finally say goodbye. The community organized a memorial service for Aria. Over 400 people attended, far more than had come to the vigils in recent years. They filled the pews, lined the walls, spilled out onto the church steps. Some had known Aria personally, others had only heard her story. But they all came to honor a life stolen too soon and a family that had never stopped fighting for justice. A scholarship fund was established in Aria's name at Bay de Noc Community College, the Aria Harris Memorial Nursing Scholarship. Every year, it helps a student from Michigan's Upper Peninsula pursue their dream of becoming a nurse, the same dream Aria never got to fulfill. Her name would live on, not as a victim, not as a cold case, but as a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of never giving up. For Manistique, the healing process was complicated. Some residents struggled to reconcile the Bob Kellerman they'd known, the friendly shopkeeper, the Little League sponsor with the monster who'd murdered a young woman and hidden it for nearly 4 decades. Parents who'd trusted him with their children felt betrayed, violated, angry at themselves for not seeing the truth. Others found a strange kind of closure, the fear that had lingered for 39 years, the sense that a killer might still be walking among them, was finally gone. Doors could be unlocked again. Kids could walk home after dark. Trust, though damaged, could begin to rebuild. Detective Sarah Vance received commendations from the Michigan State Police and the FBI for her work on the case, but she deflected the praise. "This wasn't about me," she said in an interview with the Manistique Pioneer Tribune. "This was about Aria, about her family, about proving that even decades later, justice is still possible." The case became a teaching example in forensic science programs across the country, a testament to the importance of preserving evidence, no matter how old or seemingly insignificant. That small stain on a purse strap, catalogued and stored in 1970, had waited 39 years to tell its story. And it did. Aria Harris's story is a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, that monsters don't always look like monsters, that the person who waves at you in the grocery store, who coaches your kid's baseball team, who fixes your leaky faucet, could be carrying unimaginable darkness. But it's also a reminder that truth has a way of surfacing, that families who refuse to give up can move mountains, that science, patience, and determination can reach back through decades to deliver justice when all hope seems lost. If this story moved you, please share it. Aria's story deserves to be remembered, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime cases that finally found justice. What's the weather like where you are today? Let me know in the comments below.